Hi, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. I'm Drew, and I think Anthony just said a lot of what I was going to cover, so hopefully that will shorten this talk a little bit. But yeah, I'm Drew. I'm speaking to you today as co-director of the Census Open Innovation Labs and a director and a co-founder of one of the programs that we run that you may be familiar with called the Opportunity Project. So today, I think even just hearing some of the intro talks, I get the sense that this is going to be a little bit different than the other things that you're going to hear about today. I'm going to tell you about how we have made a government startup stick over time and some advice that I've learned about how to make that happen. First, I'll tell you about the program, where we started from, where we are today, and I'll end with a little bit more about open innovation and open source at the Census Bureau. But first, I want to tell you what we do at the Census Bureau in case you're not familiar. I know there's some colleagues here from Census today. So you probably know that we count the people once every 10 years. We count every single person. We also do a lot to measure the population and the economy in between. And we do a lot of really cool stuff to disseminate all of that data. My team is the Census Open Innovation Labs. We're the open innovation people who are engaging developers, technologists, media makers, creatives of all kinds, generally looking outside of our own walls to figure out how we can deliver on our mission better by working together. We run a few different programs, and our flagship really is the Opportunity Project. So this is a program that some people in the room may actually have participated in. I know we've worked with Mapbox before. And it's a process that we use to bring together people from the tech industry, government, communities, to work together and rapidly prototype products that solve big problems with open data. I can say that sentence, and that's kind of like our summary, our overview, but it probably makes more sense in the context of why we started this work in the first place. So let me take you back to a few years ago. Some of you were probably looking at the open data landscape as well back in 2015 and saying, wow, we have almost 200,000 open data sets on places like data.gov. Is anything actually happening with that information, or is it just kind of sitting there, technically open to the public, but really just sitting there on the internet? And in a lot of cases, it was just sitting there. So the Opportunity Project, or TOP as an acronym, is one of the things that we built on top of that original open data landscape as a way to actually transform data into something that's useful and solves problems for people. And so these are the three pillars that we talk about with this work. The first is making it really easy for people who are trying to solve the same problems to come together and collaborate, not have to worry about, contracts and NDAs and what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. Let's just make it easy for them to work together. The second is to really make that data more user-friendly, better utilized, better transformed into value. And the third, really the bottom line for us, is that we want to actually solve problems. We don't just want to create cool tech. We want to see the needle move on things like homelessness, the opioid crisis, disaster response, all of the problems that we've tackled. The way that we do that is something that I'm sure everyone is familiar with. We run tech development sprints. I'll tell you a little bit more about exactly how that process works, but the gist is that all through remote collaboration, people from many different industries sign up to work together to build technology that solves a particular set of problems for real people. We have a set of virtual milestones, think like a Google Hangout type of format, every couple of weeks over a period of a few months. And at the end of the process, we launch really exciting technologies. When I say that we're tackling big problems, again, that's things like the opioid crisis, promoting STEM education, connecting people with jobs, some of the biggest problems that we're all thinking about. And we've worked with everybody, including Mapbox, big companies like IBM and Cisco, consumer-facing companies like Redfin, Zillow, Fitbit, LinkedIn, Airbnb, smaller startups, students, civic tech groups, really anybody who can put together some type of tech product we've worked with. And together we've created 80 products to date as of this year, including some of the ones that you see here. At the end of every year, we have a big open demo day where we bring people together to launch the products. We have live interactive demos, and we just bring people together who aren't usually next to each other and start to have conversations about how we can carry this work forward. It's always just really fun to see FEMA and tech people and communities talking to each other. Okay, so why am I talking about TOP? because it's a government startup that after 3 years is still thriving. We're not just around still, but we're actually doing better than we were 3 years ago over a pretty tough transition period. And so that's in terms of the problems that we're tackling, the outputs, the outcomes. Our team is growing, we're expanding in all directions, and I'll tell you a little bit more about why I think that's the case. But first, I need you to understand where we started from and how rudimentary our process was a few years ago so you can understand where we got to today and why we think that's better. So let me take you back to early 2016, about 3 years ago, when we had our 1.0 sprint process with the very first set of 12 companies. Our process at the time was really like 6 to 8 weeks. And that means that 2 weeks after a kickoff call, when we started pointing people in a direction, we had an alpha demo, and then a beta demo 2 weeks later. And some of you may be saying, you know, at my company, we do 2 and 3 day sprints. That's really not that fast. But this was 2 weeks to a demo of a brand new product, in some cases with a totally different end user audience than this group had ever thought about before, and a problem they didn't know anything about. So that's really fast. We also only had a few government people and about 30 technologists from those first 12 companies at the table. We didn't have any end users. It was a pretty small group. And our data discovery process was really basic. We just had a list of generally opportunity-related data sets that included things like the locations of schools, parks, crimes, hospitals, think like dots on a map kind of data sets. But in spite of that very simple process, out came these 12 incredible tools, including the ones that you see here from Redfin and a company called Streetwise. And that really proved the model to us. So fast forward 3 years later to the 3.0 sprint process after 7 sprint cycles. We now have a 14-week process. We've made it a lot longer. We've incorporated end users, data and product experts, a dedicated sprint milestone for data exploration and user research. And our data curation process is a lot more sophisticated now, incorporating both human being data stewards, again, dedicated time in the sprint process, and curation of data sets around the particular problems that people were trying to solve. And what comes out of the process now is much more diverse. That includes SAR data, like you see here, games, interactive maps like the one built by Mapbox, a field data collection app built by Spatial Networks, interactive video libraries, AI algorithms to connect people with jobs, and a whole lot more. And so this is why we think we're doing better, because we have more outputs, more outcomes that are more user-centered, they're sustainable, they have a path for getting into people's hands. And we're also spreading this work across government. We're seeing other agencies to adopt this process and actually start running their own sprints that's helping to exponentially increase what we can do together. So this is the question that I'll focus on for the rest of the time. How do we get from there to here in a period of time when a lot of equally great programs died or just aren't the same anymore? Or to ask a bigger question that may be more relevant to everyone here, how do you make programs, products, technologies stick? And I also want to mention that although I'm mostly talking about the Opportunity Project today, pretty much everything I've done has been building a thing and trying to get it to stick. And I have failed a lot more often than I've succeeded on the stick part, so I'm incorporating all of that here as well. Okay, so this is the list that I've come up with. It's like a little bit dark right now, but I'm going to talk through each of these things to share what I've learned. So the first thing is to value experimentation and create a culture of testing every change that you make and taking that as learning. So our process has changed a lot over the last few years, and none of that is by accident. It's a result of really carefully looking at what we're doing, how we're doing it, considering every change something that we're testing. Basically, my advice is to be a scientist of your own work. We're very aware that the outcomes of our process, the products, are a direct result of how we operate and what the inputs are. So we pay really close attention to that. We're constantly testing and throwing out what doesn't work. So a few examples of that. After the very first sprint cycle, we had been moving so fast. And in the second year, when we were first kind of transitioning into a permanent program, we started out thinking, maybe we can just turn this into a digital toolkit and kind of disseminated across the country. And we had really great collaborators at Civic Hall Labs. Some of you may have worked with them. And to their credit, they said to us, do you guys even know if this works? Are you sure you're ready to just pack it up and ship it out nationally? Or do you really want to test whether this is working and how you can do it better? And that really set us on this trajectory of micro experimentation and testing lots of different models and tweaks within the process to see how we can make it better. And that's actually the graphic that you see here on the left. I know the font is probably very small, but the point is that that's the actual second-year roadmap of our program, where we made our sprints much smaller. We decided to iteratively test different tweaks to the process, how we can make that work better. So one of the first questions that we asked was, how do we make these products more user-centered so that they can actually get into people's hands and start to solve problems? Let's experiment. Let's throw a bunch of things at that problem. We brought in end users. We made up this role called the user advocate, and we got some companies to help pilot that with us and share back how they were doing it and what they were learning. And so we learned a ton through that process, and we decided to keep some of the things that were working and throw out what wasn't. In the second year of the program, we asked something similar about product sustainability. And at the same time, we are really conscious to not just keep adding, but really strip away anything out of the process and the program that we don't need and that's not working. So we've done that with something as simple as having a listserv that we don't do anymore, data discovery processes that no technologists were telling us were helpful. And in 2018, we also introduced thematic cohorts. And so that's what you see on the right there was the first ever geospatially focused sprint, where we had a lot of different geospatial problems. And what that allowed us to test was also an in-person workshop during this totally virtual process. If you think about this, we're working together for about 3 months, and people never meet in person until the very end at demo day. So we said, if we can bring people together, and it happened to be that in San Juan, Puerto Rico, that was where all of these geospatial problems were kind of interrelated and really hitting the ground around local address data, disaster response, environmental stewardship. Bringing people together at the beginning of the process for some in-person user research from government, community groups, tech companies, that was so beneficial to the process, and we considered that something that we learned and can keep doing moving forward. So related to that is my second point, which is to constantly seek feedback. Yes, you want to be experimenting, but don't just self-evaluate what you think is working and what's not. Always be looking for feedback from the outside. And so we've done that a few ways. The first is that we consider user input from the people who participate in our sprints to be incredibly valuable. We really consider all those participants, the tech companies, the user advocates, our users. And so we're constantly asking them for their input on what they think we should keep and what isn't working. So a few examples of how we've done that. Everything from calling the outputs products instead of tools, from understanding why people actually join the sprints. And that relates to things like corporate social responsibility, mission alignment, access to data stewards, partnerships, PR, the ability to have a structured sprint to execute on something that they wanted to build. When people ask us that question of why do people work with you, we actually know because we've asked our users. And the data discovery process, again, is something that we've refined over time, really carefully working with the developers to understand how did you find it useful to access our data. And then we provide that information back to our agencies, and we can say, hey, you guys are building this developer hub, no one finds it useful, here's what you should do instead. We consider that all really important learning. And so the bottom line is just don't just self-evaluate. Actually go out and ask people what they think the results of your kind of micro-experimentation are. And there's really also no substitute for having a fresh set of eyes on your team. And to illustrate that, I want to also tell you about our amazing Civic Digital Fellows who came into our process, to our team this past summer. They've really helped to give kind of a smart, unbiased look at what is working and what we can do better. To their credit, they were actually the first people after a 2-year process of running sprints to point out that we don't actually have any information about sprints on our website, which may probably have been why people were a little bit confused regularly about how we actually operate. And so we said, great, please build that for us. They went out, they did user research, and they put together the amazing sprints page that you see on our website today. So no turnover is bad, 100% turnover is bad. We've kind of been in that sweet spot. So the third thing that can kind of serve as a bottom line for the first two is to stay really focused on the user. And I think this is something that Anthony touched on as well. Yes, AI is cool and machine learning and SAR data are cool, but what inspires people is actually solving a problem for real people. So saving lives after a disaster, helping a family find a job so that they don't become homeless. Those are the kinds of things that really keep people going. And we anchor ourselves to that in terms of how we operate and in terms of how we structure the environment for all of the people who work with us. So one quick example of that, these are actual user research photos from a company called Excella that worked with us in 2017. They built a really incredible product called MySpot. It's findmyspot.org. It's a tool for homeless youth experiencing homelessness to find nearby shelters and Wi-Fi hotspots. So they came into the process and they were pointed at a totally different problem statement from the Department of Education. They had said, you know, the problem we want people to focus on is connecting school principals with maps of where homeless youth are in their districts and what grants are available. And so Excella was really helping us to pilot this user advocate role. They went out and did some user research with actual homeless youth and said, no one needs that. Even the principals are saying that that's not what's needed. We are actually seeing this totally different felt need in the user community. Can we do that instead? And to their credit, the Department of Education was really cool about it. They said, absolutely, please do that. And they took that as learning that they were able to gain from the process about the communities that they serve. And so that really solidified for us the need for that user advocate role. Yes, government agencies may have a sense of the big problems, but they really don't know the user needs at a grassroots level day to day. So let's bring in the people who do and make that part of how we operate. But at the same time, if we had been really rigidly focused on the needs of the government agency or sticking to our process no matter what, we wouldn't have had as good of an outcome. And that brings me to another point, which is adapt to survive, or I could say this as adapt in order to thrive. Be flexible enough that you can allow your goals to change when they need to. One of the ways that this has come up for us is that people ask us sort of what counts in the process as a product. What are they allowed to do? At the beginning, we were sort of inadvertently focusing on open source, encouraging people to spin up new apps and websites that they could either open source the code or make free and available to the public. And over time, we've learned that if our goal, what's important to us, is really to create lasting technologies that get into people's hands and solve real problems, then open source and new products, that's not necessarily going to work out the best. That may not even usually be a good idea. So now what we encourage is anything that has a path to sustainability and actual impact. If that means you're building within an existing product or platform, then that's great, and that's totally fine with us. We realize that the two things that we want to anchor ourselves to are using federal open data and addressing the problem. And anything else was kind of derivative and not important. We give everyone else total flexibility to work outside of those two things. That not only gets us better outcomes, but it also allowed us, without kind of compromising anything about our program and who we are, to anchor ourselves to a larger government effort around using data to drive the economy. Similarly, what we find is that this is a general process, and although we started out focusing on sort of housing and community development, this is something that could be applied to any problem generally, and that's helped us to really 10x the work. So the final thing I want to mention about adaptability is to let yourself give up the fights that don't matter and focus on the wins that do. So there are things that will drive you crazy, especially in government and a large organization, will drive you crazy if you let them, like the rigid rules around how you're allowed to send out an email invitation, or bureaucratic processes that you absolutely have to follow when you're updating your website that makes it take 2 months, and tech people don't really understand why that's the case. Those things don't matter. We sign up to lose those fights, because what we realize is that bringing 300 people into the Census Bureau from all around the world to participate in an open innovation event, the overall way of working, that's what matters. And that's a tide change where we're making a lot of progress. And so we focus on that instead. Another really critical thing is to be patient. It takes a really long time for things to catch on. Not everyone is going to get it. And once people do get it and it's established, transition takes a really long time. You're not moving on in a month or even a year. And I think that has definitely affected things that I've worked on in the past and other programs and us with the Opportunity Project. Part of the reason for that is that any team, product, organization has a culture to it. And if you don't have someone stick around through the long haul of transition and adoption, that original culture, intention of what we were doing can really get lost. And that's especially true when you're in a huge bureaucracy, whether that's in government, in industry, or anything else. So we've always done some degree of teaching new people on our team about the organizational culture of who we are and why we do what we do. And we've actually started to require a training for the 20 to 30 people from across government who work with us each year to teach them just that. But again, the reason that we're able to do that is that we have someone from the original team who knows what it's important to pass on. And because of that, we can have people stand up in each year of the program and really have some connective thread with the spirit, the goals of the original team, what made it a good idea in the first place, and kind of keep that infectious energy that keeps us going. So the last, and I think probably the most important thing, is to be fun and have fun. Bureaucracy is a slog sometimes, and if you forget about the people, if you forget to have fun, that can really drag the team down. So don't skip the fun stuff. Celebrate birthdays, celebrate Halloween, wear costumes to your meetings, do whatever you have to do. I've definitely learned that if you want to stick, you have to continuously create a team and a product that people want to be part of. And that's especially important to us because open innovation is about bringing people to the table. So this is what I've come up with. I don't think that this list is exhaustive or final, but hopefully it's a good place to start a conversation about how we can all do this work better. Just to take this back really quickly to open source at Census. This is how we've continued momentum. I know that you also need a management environment that allows that to happen. And so I get the question pretty frequently, is this the right environment? Does the Opportunity Project and our team belong at Census? And I think it does. It's definitely something that we've worked at. The reason for that is that at Census, we have a unique mandate that no one else has, not Google, not Facebook, to engage every single soul in the country every 10 years. And if we can get people to connect with the data, to feel like they're using that information, not just to send it to a black box in government, but to really bring it back to themselves and their communities and feel like they're a part of something that's helping people, then that lets us achieve our whole mission better. Or to say that more simply, the Census Bureau has to reach everyone, so we should be the best at it. And what we're doing is a part of making that happen. So finally, I want to ask everyone here to work with us. This is a call to action. We're about to launch a new round of sprints. Please sign up to work with us. Agencies, if there are feds in the room, we have an open call for topics that you'd like to focus on. Tech companies, advocates, participate in our process and help us to build something. And don't forget to respond to the 2020 census next year. I'll be around the rest of the day. Please come keep the conversation going. Thank you.